Morning. So welcome to the next panel on monitoring high integrity projects. So I'm Rachael Nutter. I'm the Director for Project Development at Climate Impact Partners. Climate Impact Partners we're a trusted partner of corporates to help them with their climate mitigations, and we do that through providing a lot of carbon offsetting solutions from projects that exist today, but also my part of the business, which is developing new projects and investing fairly significant amounts of money over long time periods into new projects, at the moment predominantly in ARR projects. So we're deploying money from corporates and investors into those projects. I'm working very closely with those projects over a long time, delivering them. So we've kind of seen we've seen under the hood. We live daily the practical challenges of monitoring those projects. Got a fantastic panel which I hope is going to bring some, I know is going to bring some really interesting perspectives. They all look at this from a slightly different point of view. And I've also got two enormous thank yous, because you'll see that I don't know if you've got the names. The names that were up there from the panel, we've only got two of the original members. So a massive thank you to Will Close-Brooks from Respira, who stepped in to replace someone who's sick. So Will is from Respira and representing that sort of investor perspective. And MacDonald from Sylvera, so one of the ratings agencies who are, really helping to provide that sort of the ratings that investors and buyers are looking for. So we spend a lot of time talking to Sylvera and understanding how we're all tackling the same challenges. Nick Kempson, who is from Climate Impact Partners. So Nick is at the coalface of working with local project delivery partners as we develop our projects. And Jon Pierre, who gets the biggest thank you of all, who stepped in about 20 minutes ago because we've had a panel member who's been delayed on transport, so hasn't been able to make it. So Jon Pierre is from Geotree, so bringing the monitoring and technology solutions to bear. So thank you very much, Jon. So I will, just to give a little bit of context, so a lot of, we've got a lot of topics that have come up yesterday around increasing scrutiny of projects, and particularly increasing scrutiny as the scale of this market and the amount of money involved, is a big thing that drives scrutiny. People want to know what the money's going into. In particular, where people are putting money in up front into these projects, you really want to know what's happening as those projects deploy. Some of the other trends we're seeing, there's a lot more availability of technology. Jon will be able to talk to that, and Anne will be able to talk to that. So a lot of new data sources, much better resolution data sources, more digital ways of collecting data. This is a data business. Carbon projects are data projects. We need people who are really brilliant at doing stuff on the ground, who can plant trees and deal with communities and do things in a really sort of high code of conduct way. But if you haven't got data, you haven't got a carbon project. And that's one of the biggest things that I think we see when we're talking to developers, is getting them to understand that data, and a lot of it. So we'll talk a lot about that. But that's changed. That wasn't there 10 years ago. So there's a lot of people, really applying some huge brains, applying, their minds to how do we solve these problems, and how do we get to be able to better monitor carbon projects. So I think a lot of things to talk about here. And I'd like to kick off. I'll let the panel introduce themselves, and also just throw in a little starter for 10 question on what does integrity mean to you? We all come at that with a little slightly different viewpoint. And how do your clients think about integrity? What are they looking for when they ask about integrity, and how we're monitoring that? Will, perhaps you'd like to kick us off.
Morning, everybody. My name's Will Close-Brooks. I'm a director with Respira. We're a carbon finance business established in 2019. We are focused on nature-based projects globally, which we underwrite and provide long-term investment, and then we aggregate the carbon coming off those projects and then look to structure an on-sell to end users of the carbon, primarily corporates. And to date, we've invested into a number of forest projects globally. Includes REDD+ projects in East and West Africa, some afforestation and reforestation projects in Paraguay and Laos, and also we were one of the first investors into the largest mangrove restoration project in the Indus Delta. I think, paramount to this market is the integrity of the carbon, and I'm going to let the rest of the panel speak to that, but I think it goes without saying that at the moment this market is being driven by concerns around quality of baselines, risk of overcrediting. So additionality, permanence, and so forth is the key sort of building block. But I would say where we've always emphasized integrity is looking at transparency and equity. So when you select projects, who is the counterpart? To what extent have they developed solid governance structures, embedding in the landscape in which the project sits? And what are the long-term incentives for the communities that are actually delivering the project, as many of the forest, certainly conservation projects are. And I think the important thing about transparency and having alignment models is that it helps to engender more permanence. And I think one of the areas where this avoidance credits part of the market suffers is from durability, what happens beyond 20 years, 30 years. So if we can improve the governance models and it strengthen the long-term security of the asset.
Thank you. And Anna, would you like to give a perspective then from the ratings agencies?
Yeah, so first off, background, Anna, I'm a technical climate consultant at Sylvera. We're a carbon markets intelligence platform. If you're familiar with us, you're probably most familiar with the ratings that we provide. And we use data and tech to enable corporates to make better decisions when participating in the VCM, both to mitigate risk and also to educate and build up that knowledge base. And I get to sit in a bit of a unique position within the company, working between the technical teams and the commercial teams, both to sort of bridge that gap of knowledge, work closely with our clients, like Will from Respira and Climate Impact Partners, so that they can get up that curve. And when it comes to integrity, obviously we use a lot of data and tech to look at the quantification of projects, but if I was to pick 3 words on what integrity means, I would say that would be transparency, like Will said, accountability, and also a bit of humility, being willing to actually course correct in light of new data, in light of market movements, in light of new tech and science that can make your projects have better quality and integrity going forward.
Great, thank you. And Nick?
Yeah, morning everybody.
A view from the front line.
Yeah, so Nick Kempson, MBS Technical Manager at Climate Impact Partners in the project development team alongside Rachael. So I work on all the technical aspects of projects, trying to bring them through to full commercial investment. That involves looking at all the things that Sylvera looks at, additionality, permanence, carbon quality, baselining, GIS, all those kinds of things. As well as making sure that the partners on the ground, as Will alluded to, are kind of aligned on the community side as well. And I think we've covered quite a lot of what integrity means to me there as well, I think. The one thing I would add on the aligned incentive side is that I think that is absolutely critical for permanence, as Will referenced. But that's not just about equity in terms of pricing of the credits, it's also about the holistic impact of the projects on the ground. So we work with projects in Asia, where we have fruit tree planting with smallholder farmers. We have some bamboo projects as well. And for the communities there, where carbon and carbon credits are a million miles away from what they work with on a day-to-day basis, the immediate aligned incentives around those projects are around jobs and income for doing some of the work, then about income from the trees and from the fruit or the bamboo poles that they may be sustainably harvesting, and finally about the carbon credits, which are, let's be honest, years away on some ARR projects and a million miles away from what communities know. So I think that community alignment and aligned incentives over time is important, but there are a few steps to get through on that to make sure that you're building sustainable projects.
Thank you. And I'll add what I hope is an interesting story from Nick and I. Were in the Philippines earlier this year at the project site. But just an insight into some of the practical challenges of talking about carbon pricing alignments with indigenous communities. all through a translator, suddenly having to explain what is carbon and how, trying to engage them on how do you get paid for carbon. And they were saying, well, but what is it? I can't see it. What is it? I don't know what it is. And I'm standing there thinking, okay, am I doing GCSE biology or am I going to talk about the voluntary carbon market? They're both quite difficult, to people through a translator. And one of the responses we had from Nick came up with the genius way of talking about invisible fruit. And so you have to grow the tree so that, the carbon dioxide is in the plant, so the bigger it is, the more of it you have. And this guy said, but I don't want any carbon dioxide because that might poison me. And it's kind of, okay, there's a really practical kind of how do you talk to someone about what's a carbon credit? Anyway, sorry, total aside and nothing to do with monitoring, but standing in that room at that point, it was kind of, oh, yeah, consultations on carbon credit revenue share. Okay, that's quite complicated. Anyway, sorry, total aside. John, back on topic.
Yes, thanks, Rachel. Good morning, everyone. And I think you actually gave me 10 minutes before you swapped me into this panel, but, I won't hold it against you. So, good morning, everyone. I'm Jon Pierre. I'm CEO of Geotree. We use remote sensing, data science, and process modeling to assess and monitor nature-based carbon projects. And we really work across the whole spectrum of nature-based projects. In forestry, we do RED and ARR plus IFM. We do a lot of projects in agriculture as well. I have a session later today, so Rachel, I'm sure I'm allowed to advertise my session with one of our clients, Rabobank, which will focus on agriculture particularly. So we do soil carbon for regen ag and also rice in particular. And I think, when it comes to integrity, I think, just to add to what the panelists have already said, I'll just, give my perspective that the project does what it says on the tin, right? So, you can have a project which is relatively low impact, let's say, in terms of the climate outcomes, the biodiversity outcomes, the community outcomes. But, as long as that's in line with what, the investors or the offset buyers or the communities know from the outset, then I think there is integrity. So just that differentiate, just to differentiate between integrity and impact. But so I think that's where, hopefully with some of the revisions which are taking place, right, from the methodology perspective, talking about the GNR methodologies which are coming online, and we've already worked with, on 20 RED projects, trying to move to that kind of GNR baseline approach. The new ARR methodology which is coming on, and we're working with one of our clients, Amazon, on some of those projects with respect to tree planting and the new Vera methodology, which has dynamic baseline approaches and new leakage tools. And similarly for agriculture, we have a whole new swathe of methodologies which are coming in and hopefully plugging into some of the technology which we're going to discuss on the panel here. But yeah, that's my initial perspective to your question, Rachel.
Right, thank you. And so just picking up on that and really thinking out, I just want to put monitoring a little bit of context of the life cycle of a project. So, there is the moment when you're trying to convene, pull together a project, really identifying partners, etc., and designing the project. You start thinking about the monitoring at that point. Then you've got the implementation activity, and then you've got this longer-term monitoring. And we think about it in sort of those different time phases. So let's start at the start. And maybe one for Nick and Will, what do you think, what is it that you're looking for when a project opportunity comes past your desk? What are the things that you're really looking for to say, this could be a high integrity project and we're going to be able to put really robust monitoring into this? Nick, maybe do you want to?
Yeah, and again, Will touched on it before. I think the quality of the counterparty is very important as a first step. I think domain expertise in whatever the project is, not necessarily carbon expertise, but an understanding if it's an ARR project, have they planted trees before? Have they done it at sufficient scale? If it's mangrove restoration, what have they done there? If it's conservation, what are their experiences on the ground? I think that's a really important first step for me. And then digging into the operational capacity of those counterparties as well. So again, how do they manage their data? If they've planted trees, show me mortality rates. Or if they've done some work on mangrove restoration, again, show me what they look like 3 years down the line. I think that's the first building block for me. Following on from that, I think project design, which we see as more of a partnership approach. So if there is a credible project design in terms of species or demarcation of the area or initial understanding of deforestation, that's a good starting point. But I think increasingly, if we've got the right partner, we see project development as a partnership that we might design together and start to frame the project as a team rather than something we take and just take at face value. So I think that's the first one for me.
Thank you. And Will?
Yeah, I mean, again, not without sort of getting into the specifics around the technical aspects of baseline selection and so forth. I mean, I think adding to the points on what we look for in the developer and the implementation expertise, I would say that length of experience in the field in which the project sits, including connectivity across communities, district government and national government. And I would say that's more and more coming to the fore because the space is moving so fast around jurisdictional carbon, potential intrusion of Article 6 mechanisms. And, we saw it or heard it yesterday with Zimbabwe. Last year we had various moratoriums with places like Indonesia. So I think having developers who are really connected into national government and can see the direction of travel is again going to be very critical when you're investing long-term into projects. And drilling more into the detail and specifics around kind of equity and alignment models, I think we do want to see specific benefit sharing agreements. And that's not that there's a set percentage because every project is going to vary in its core capex. If it's a project that has a lot of education, it's protecting against subsistence conversion. In dispersed communities, it's going to be very different from a big, sort of block conversion around soy, palm, planned versus unplanned deforestation. So I think, actually really understanding though what the mechanisms are once the project has been put on a stable footing through carbon finance and how much of the dividend, so to speak, tracks back to the communities and how that gets spent and who, what structures. And that's not, exporting or imposing structures. Typically, the best projects are building on existing community-based governance structures.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point to pick up on. We talk about monitoring and everyone we think about satellites, we think about measuring trees and so on. There's some real monitoring to be done about whether money is going to where it should be going. In general, we're all operating in, high corruption, high poverty areas quite often. And that just has inherent risks. So, I think when we talk about monitoring, that governance, where the money's going, community complaints are also things that we have to monitor in these projects that I think get sometimes slightly second order compared to the carbon and the baseline conversations that we have.
And just on that, I know Joe from Carbon Tanzania was in one of the panels yesterday. I recall a conversation with his partner Mark, who said that I think they spend more than half their time working out the post-payment dynamics on the ground in the community. So I'm sure he would have some insights on that and how challenging it is beyond just planting trees or protecting ecosystems.
Yeah. And Anna, changing tack a little bit from that then, let's talk a little bit about baselining and so on. Do you want to give a perspective on, because obviously that's a critical part of, measuring against a baseline, and perhaps talk a little bit how you guys think about, I know we talked about, at the start of a project, you're making reference areas and thinking about baselining. Over time, you learn more. And you've always got the benefit of hindsight 5 years down the line. And so maybe you could give a little perspective about how Sylvera thinks about that.
Yeah, so baselines are the contentious issue with REDD+ projects. That's what gets all the press at the moment. And getting to a reasonable baseline is really hard. And that tech is constantly evolving and changing over time. And I think actually Calyx, frankly, did some good insights on looking at baselines and how they've changed over time and looking at their views on perhaps how inflated they are and they're actually decreasing with that increase in tech. And the way we currently look at it is by looking at how well those proxy areas are selected, looking at a whole host of risk factors. I won't bore you with the full list, but looking at both physical parameters as well as sort of softer risk factors like Are the same legal requirements in place? What's the land ownership like between communities and private owners? And then we look at a really quantified assessment of how reasonable is it that the baseline proposed by the project is valid. So we look at whether the trajectory that they've forecast has emerged in a similar area, not just across the reference area that the project determined, but also an area perhaps that we might have selected as a subset that we think might be better. And that's obviously information we feed back to the developers and the investors in the project, so you get a chance to course correct and respond to that information. Yeah, I think that's
Thank you.
what I do.
So flipping then on a little bit more to the kind of the more technical aspects of monitoring, and you know, we will focus a little bit on predominantly on carbon here. But Jon, do you want to give a, you know, what's happening in digital and remote monitoring? You know, what can we do today? What are the things that you're working on to monitor projects, and perhaps touch a little bit upon some of the data sources that we're using? Because I think certainly when I started looking at this space, it's a minefield. There's satellite data. Well, you suddenly realise there's a whole lots of different types of satellite data. There's a lot of publicly available data. There's increasing resolutions, but there are all sorts of different data sources that you pull on. So maybe, Jon, you could comment on that and kind of what you're able to do at the moment.
Yeah, sure, Rachel. And it's a really exciting time when it comes to incorporating all these new technologies and data sources into the monitoring and also the early stage assessment of projects. I've been involved with using remote sensing to monitor vegetation for probably the past 15 years. Initially as an agriculture commodities trader, where, post-Obama, there was, freely available satellite data which could be used to monitor crop yields. But I think even more recently, we've had, on that term you mentioned in terms of resolution, on 3 dimensions, a real increase in whether it's the pixel resolution, so moving from coarser resolution to high resolution satellite data. We work with partners like Maxar when needed to incorporate those kind of data sources, but also when it comes to temporal resolution, being able to get daily imagery if needed, or monthly, where before you probably were more restricted to annual revisits, and then also the spectral resolution. So we, on some projects, like on the soil carbon side, we've used multispectral and also moving into hyperspectral data. So just kind of for the layperson, imagine seeing all new dimensions in terms of being able, to understand, for soil, for example, the chemical compositions almost, just using all the spectral data from satellites. So I think that, that's the kind of the data side. Everyone, I'm sure, in here is kind of familiar with the advances in AI. It seemed to kind of creep up on everyone, I think, in the past few months. But this has been a kind of long slog, I think. And we've been very fortunate that, our chief scientific advisor, he's been, head of the Turing Institute, leading academic in Cambridge. So I think we're able to see and connect the dots now to what's actually required to the point of a high integrity carbon project. I think that really starts almost at the ideation stage, right? And that's where we started to incorporate the technology. Is the intervention recommended actually suitable in that location? Whether it's looking at historical weather and forecasted climate data, looking at historical land use. Many times we've been approached to do projects in locations where actually it doesn't qualify for a Verra Gold Standard project because of the historical land use profile. And then understanding the carbon potential going forward as well. So, like I said, we have commercial satellite data providers we've partnered up with, like Maxar. Spire is another one that has a super interesting data source when it comes to weather, using radio occultation. You can imagine in places like the Amazon, we don't have as much high-quality historical weather data, but now using satellites, we can also be able to get a very high-resolution, regularly updated understanding of the weather patterns and weather profile and climate profile of locations globally. So I think that's where the technology is there. It's a question of how best and scalably do we connect it to the requirements from a carbon integrity, but also impact perspective. So that's the question for the market, I guess, and for practitioners like yourself going forward.
And I think, I don't know how much people know about satellite data, but for the nerds out there, I mean, the thing that struck me, I would say, well, what can I actually see on these data? So the big public satellites, I think, are sort of 30-meter resolution, aren't they? And the best private satellites are, 30 meters are kind of 30
get 10 as well.
Yeah. So it's like from 30 meter, the big NASA, ESA, down to 30 centimeters, which is pretty amazing. And do you want to comment a little bit on, this idea that, the nirvana, that we're going to be able to push a button and we're going to be able to have instant verification and calculate biomass, and it's all going to be marvelous, and we'll be able to do automated issuances once a month?
I mean, it would be great if we get to that point eventually, right? Like that would be ideal. One of the things that we've been working on is trying to address some of those challenges and uncertainties you get. So when you're looking at those public and also private satellite data sources, they're at 30-meter resolution or below, that can give you a sense of what's happening. But often linking that to the actual changes in carbon and biomass on the ground is then actually really difficult. To speak to the academics and scientists in our research team who have come from leading institutions, other satellite data companies like Maxar, etc. They have a real bugbear with the word ground truth is banned quite firmly by Pedro. And the thing that we're trying to do is help bridge that gap. So you've got the satellite data at 30-meter resolution. You can see the top of the canopy, but you can't actually see what's underneath. And models that exist today currently track degradation, which is often actually one of the major causes of carbon loss in these forestry projects. Those models aren't quite up to scratch yet. And what we're doing with our brilliant field research team, they're going around the world to different biomes with getting multi-scale LiDAR data, which means taking drones both at sort of canopy floor, looking at the actual through the canopy and above canopy. So we're getting data, which is a unique data set. No one else has this. You can literally pick out individual leaves and model the entire sort of 3D, get a 3D visual of what's actually existing under that canopy. And then we can start correlating that data to what we see above canopy to be able to solve that problem of not being able to track biomass with a really integral and accurate way. Shameless plug. We've got a carbon market summit on June 8th, and some of the members of our MSL team will actually be talking about that work and how it will be feeding into our ratings and what we're doing with that data to support governments with jurisdictional assessments, but also buyers to track that performance. So it's a challenge, but it's hopefully being solved.
And Rachael, can I just add to that there's been great advances when it comes to biomass. Many providers out there who are talking about incorporating different kinds of satellite data, also things like LiDAR as well, or JEDI data sets that are available. But I think when we look at the real pain points in the market, things like the baselines, which we've discussed, right? That's where actually we have available technology which has been tested. The dynamic baseline for ARR projects, that's using spectral data, right, to match your project area to control plots elsewhere. And then you can monitor, you can choose if you want to use more ground data or you want to use remote sensing. But the whole point is to have a really accurate reference so you don't have the constant argument of having inaccurate baselines. Mm-hmm. And this has been tested already for ARR, for IFM, and also by many professors in places like Cambridge University and elsewhere for RED projects. Although obviously there's been a bit of a debate between Vera and some of the other practitioners about whether you should apply that to RED, but it's clearly coming down the track for ARR and IFM at least. So I think that's where we can see technology coming in and giving us a good leap in terms of the integrity at the early stage of the assessment of the project. So that's very vital to also emphasize.
Yeah, I think for us as an investor, these tools become really important for risk management. So when we're managing our portfolio, and at the moment we have quite lumpy verification events, they're expensive, involve site visits and so forth. And waiting kind of 2-3 years and then having an uncertain amount of carbon, if we can know, for instance, if there's been a reversal event or some leakage, that kind of thing, then we have a much more accurate readout on the yield profile. Or alternatively, if we've made an upfront investment and it's milestone-based financing, looking at growth rates, survival rates in saplings, for instance, to unlock a next tranche of financing. But it does presuppose, the cost of some of these technologies comes down. And I think there's always that dynamic between, accuracy and cost.
I just want to pick up on that as well, actually, Will. So we've got some large corporate clients that we work with who also have that same concern about just being able to have directionally correct estimates of biomass. It doesn't have to be enough for Vera to be certifying or issuing against, but they at least want to know if there's a 3-5 year lag between planting and issuing, that things are on track and that there's some technology that can tell them where they're at, even if it's not to a confidence level that Vera would accept. So I think that's a really important piece of this. And the corporate I'm thinking about, actually, it's become even more apparent this year because that digital monitoring, for 2 reasons. One was obviously the Guardian article in January, which was a big issue, raised the concern of how do we know what's going on in our projects to a senior level at the organisation. And then secondly, they had a huge under-delivery of tons as well, 2/3 of what they expected. So getting something and some data that they can have a level of confidence in is absolutely crucial for these guys to meet their net zero targets.
And I think just quickly on the implementation of the projects as well, because I think that's where, often we talk about the satellites from a monitoring side and biomass. Now, what we found in talking to a lot of project developers and NGOs, they also need technology on the ground. So we had to actually develop mobile apps, for example, for local communities in local languages to give them things like agronomic advice and to help with the whole on-the-ground implementation of the projects. We also have crop insurance, actually, to help smallholder farmers actually be able to build capacity and not have to resort to deforestation when it comes to actually what some of the main drivers of some of the kind of projects that we're looking at. So I think there's opportunity to have a really holistic approach to things, where the technology is not just monitoring the project once it's up and running, but coming in and helping to implement at an early stage and help the local communities not have to resort in the first place to having to deforest. So that's another angle I would like to emphasize, which I don't think gets enough attention as well.
Actually, yeah, I want to pick up on that with perhaps with Nick on, we're talking a lot about satellite data when trees are grown. We do a lot of tree planting projects, and that's something that, a lot of our clients they want to invest in because that's where they perceive there's going to be a challenge in accessing high integrity supply in future. It just takes a long time for trees to grow, and everyone wants removals to be in line with science-based targets, etc. So, that's a particular crunch point. But, what we found is in that implementation phase, those first few years where you've got the little tiny saplings and so on, satellite data is not a great deal of use at that point. And what we want to know, our leading indicators, is what's being planted, where's it being planted. And then as the trees grow, you've got 2 sources of data now, from the sky, from the ground. No, you guys don't like the ground truth, but you have got 2
ground
sets of data.
Data, just calling
ground
it ground truth.
Yeah,
phrase.
okay.
Ground data.
So, but ground data, okay, we're good. But you've got those, the combination of all of that data. So, Nick, do you want to just talk about just the practicalities and some of the things that we've learned around how do I know what's actually happening in the implementation phase?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we did a few trials last year on this in 3 projects, and if we're talking about 3 stratas, right, you've got satellite, you've got airborne, LiDAR, it could be, as Anna mentioned, on drones, and then you've got the ground data, which is just physical collection, I suppose. And in the trials that we did, we set out with the idea of using satellite data to identify what had been planted, when it had been planted. And in the Philippine example we spoke about earlier, we just couldn't see the saplings. We knew where they were, we had the physical locations. It was in quite a high vegetative area. So you can imagine bamboo is small and really tiny to see. So even with high-res image at 30 centimeters, yeah, right, exactly. Trying to see those, we just couldn't see them. So I think, and we had the guys on the ground saying, no, look, they're there. When Rachel and I went out to see it, we could validate they were there. We just couldn't get those signatures at all using satellite data. So I think what we've learned is that if you use those 3 stratas, satellite probably becomes useful in mature projects or in block plantations where it's easy to see. If if it's on agroforestry, if it's on things that are already on highly vegetative areas, picking up those stands to validate planting is just really, really difficult. And you need probably all three of those strata to understand what's going on in projects.
Yeah, I mean, we, you know, when you're out there, you take lots of photos, and there's, well, it's a lot bigger than this stuff, but while you're there, you think, this is really obvious, I can entirely see it, got lots of photos, get them home, and you look at it, and it's kind of, well, in the midst of all the other vegetation, you can't even see it on a photograph when you were 10 meters away from it, so I kind of wasn't surprised you couldn't see it on the satellite. But do you want to comment also on some of the, you know, the devices for what have I planted and where have I planted it? Just being able to validate, you know, you're paying someone to plant out in the middle of nowhere. How do you know what they've actually planted and whether it's growing and whether it's still alive? Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, we've been just using kind of open source tools on Android phones, which we think are the most useful in remote areas with the communities we work with. But the challenges we get there is one of accuracy, right? So when it comes down to actually pinpointing where those trees are, it may be great because it has offline capability, you can be there, you can get photos, you can get data back from the field very quickly, but when it comes to actually the accuracy of the measurements or accuracy of the location data, we really struggle. So in the Indonesia project we're working on, we're now moving to higher grade smartphones, essentially, or GPS systems, to make sure we can pinpoint to sub 1 meter where those trees are. And that's really important when it comes to agroforestry projects, right, where we're working with smallholder farmers. They may have existing trees in their plots already, so it's not as easy as just drawing a polygon around where they're planting. And you've got to be able to actually identify those individual trees and keep an eye on those for the projects as well. So yeah, it's an ongoing challenge, actually, but it's one that we're working on to improve.
So I'm going to pause for a moment and just see if there are any questions from the floor before we continue up here.
Hi, good morning. I'm Ling from Sylvera. Rachel, you mentioned earlier that some of these projects sit in like high corruption places, right? So I have a question for the panel. There are like topics like modern slavery and corruption in some of these projects or some of these areas. So technology is great, but how do you? I presume, or I think you probably need the eyes and ears on the ground. So how do you appoint your eyes and ears if you've not already somebody on the ground to do that? And how do you monitor them then? How do you manage these eyes and ears on the ground?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And perhaps Will and Nick maybe have a view
happy
on
to
that.
start. I mean, again, I think your first line is that the standards, so whether it's Vera or Gold standards, they do have extensive requirements around things like FPIC at the outset of a project. So full, checks on legal tenure. We, obviously do our own KYC checks and look through to understand what policies the developers have in place. We go and do a site visit. We look to diligence the governance structures I alluded to earlier. I think what perhaps is beginning to change in the market is instead of just having an FPIC up front that's sort of filed, it's a continuing process. So actually you need to sort of go back and continue to make sure that actually what was set out in the project design document has been implemented continuously and therefore the project retains the support of its stakeholders.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I have much more to add other than that I think it's about your partner on the ground, right? And as Will says, not just the policies they have, which you can diligence and check before you start a project, but also how they're interacting with issues in the field when you're on site visits or when you're there. And I'll give an example of a site visit recently to Indonesia, where we have a project where a couple of my colleagues visited a nursery, and they were doing some replanting or some repotting of seedlings, and there was a little girl there who was doing some of the repotting. And that immediately sparked up, okay, is this child labour issue? What's going on here? So with the partner on the ground, they kind of made sure that they followed the process that was on paper and went through this and followed up with the cooperative, followed up with the nursery to make sure, to just find out what was going on and follow the due process. And the news that came back was essentially that she was a 9-year-old girl, was there on a Friday afternoon after school had finished, and her mum was one of the employees at the nursery. But I think the ability to see those policies that you diligence in action and be able to follow up and see those actual processes working is really important on cases like this, and shows not just what's on paper, but what's actually being implemented on the ground.
Yeah, and we spend a lot of time educating our partners in, this is really important. If you want to be investable, these are the sorts of things that you need to have processes in place for. But it's like anything. It's like trying to embed a health and safety culture. You don't do it overnight. You have to keep showing them that you're serious about it, and highlighting those things. And that's, a chance site visit. You're not there every single day. So it's really putting in place, how are you training people when you bring a cooperative on? How do you train those people in how to spot these things and that it's not acceptable? And then what are local custom and practices? Children help out on their local family farm. So who are we to say it's right or wrong for them to be helping with some of these things? So like everything else in this business, it's nuanced and requires some judgment. I think the other one, and just going back to your point, Will, on the political connections and political collections around, big landowners in some of these countries, you can guarantee they're all politically connected somewhere along the line. And so, it's things like keeping a register of any meetings that you have with a person who is politically associated. Have you got advisors in who may be really useful because they're helping you get government introductions? How are they doing that? When did they meet? But it's saying every month, can I have a look at the register? I need to see the register. I'm taking this seriously.
The first two projects we financed were with Carbon Tanzania. Joe, who you heard perhaps speak yesterday afternoon, and I think he made the point. So many people are employed in the project, in his company, in Tanzania, and there are so many people receiving a carbon dividend that actually, if the government, then were to go and try to rewrite the rules, it would upset a lot of people. So there's a lot of vested interests. So I think that it's the delivery as opposed to just having something that's a box tick, and that it's very clear when you see it. And seeing a lot of people from the project area employed in the project, in the developer company, is probably a bellwether of, that integration.
Yeah, and a lot of it's about really showing that you're serious about it. It's not just lip service. We had a really nice example, actually, of a disclosure from, one of our project partners who said, facilitation payments. Well, when we go and see tribal chiefs, we have to pay. It was a nominal amount of money. It was $20 or something for lunch or something. He said, could that be perceived as a facilitation payment? And we raised it with the client. The client was absolutely delighted. It was only $20, but they were delighted. They went and talked to their local operations, et cetera, and said, no, okay, that's fine. That's kind of custom and practice. But it's that level of detail of stuff that you have to be on. So it's a lot of things to think about. Phil?
Yeah, and really interesting discussion about the detail of verifying particularly new projects. So my question is, what is the cost of this that the project proponents are picking up, or the project planners, per hectare? Do you have a figure?
No, it's not really a per hectare because it depends on the complexity of what you're actually looking at. I would say mostly when people come to us, they've massively underestimated. So, people always say, have you pushed out, challenged them on the budget? It's like, yeah, challenged them and added loads into it, 9.9 times out of 10. I think one of the really interesting things we've discovered in testing out various different technologies is people are trying to figure out how to price their products and services. They're kind of new, they're evolving. And, Jon may have a comment on this as well, but, how are people charging for different services and kind of how do we define that? Because you guys are evolving your products as well, aren't you, the whole time?
Yeah, I would say it really depends on the project type, the location. But what I would say is it's probably, and you could probably give a better perspective, I would imagine our costs are relatively minor, compared to the other cost of doing the project, right? So, especially when you're talking about ERR project, as was mentioned yesterday, a lot of these interventions require a lot of capital. So I think that's where I would argue that having technology to de-risk the project early on, assess the project feasibility, that allows the project developer or financer to unlock the capital earlier on, thereby have a, ideally having a lower working cost of capital. So I think, it really depends, and there's no, one cookie cutter kind of answer to that question, unfortunately, Phil.
Can I just toss something in? When we were looking at fairly low resolution wind damage in Ireland, down to sort of half a hectare, we ended up paying about $200 a hectare just for that exercise. And so I'm just thinking, you're buying...
And when did you do that, Phil?
2015.
Yeah, so I would say that, the cost is...
using drones as well.
The cost is really compressed since then. And I think that's another, it's kind of like Moore's law, right? Essentially with satellite data, as with most technologies. I think we have many new commercial providers out there. It seems like, to be honest, every month we are approached as a data analytics company by a new data provider as well. And also the kind of incumbents, the Maxars, now you could call Planet as well, an incumbent. They are also themselves, to Rachel's point, even changing their pricing models because they realize that, we can't charge $200 per square kilometer or whatever, as they did 15, 20 years ago. So,
and I think the area size is that you can charge the satellites for. People are prepared to do it over smaller areas as well. So that kind of helps.
And that's even changed recently, I think, like with Airbus. I think it shows you how the products from the satellite providers are changing. You can now do it for. Previously, you had to buy like a block of like 10 by 10 meters or 10 kilometers square. You can now request your polygon and just get the data from within there, which I think is a very recent thing, which shows how far this is coming and how quickly it's kind of responding to the needs of the market.
If I can just quickly chime in with the Sylvera perspective on this. We do provide a lot of data. We're not getting involved. We don't get paid by developers. We don't charge developers for any of our work, because we're not involved in that verification and quantification that determines the number of credits that they're allowed to issue by the registries. Our customers are the buyers, the investors, those trying to seek to mitigate risks. And just to touch on, John, your point earlier, is that information is not paid for by the developers, it's paid for by the financiers, unlocking that cost of capital so that they can channel perhaps more money into the project itself rather than paying for the cost of that.
I've got massive flashing red zero, so I think we've got to stop.
Flashing for a while.
So thank you very much indeed to the panel, particularly the short notice and the very short notice panellists. Hopefully that's given a little bit of food for thought and debunked some of the myths and perhaps given a little insight into some of the practicalities of this. Thank you.